What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Hoops and Stuff podcast. I'm your host, Isaac, and today we're going to be talking about the current starting fives of each team and tell you what they need to pick up in the first round of the NBA draft. Our first team is going to be the Detroit Pistons. I'm going to go in an order of the teams that aren't as good, that'll have higher draft picks, like the number 1, number 2 draft pick, and then I'll go in order, and I'll go the teams that'll have lower draft picks that aren't as good, the draft picks aren't as good. So to start, we have the Detroit Pistons. Their starting lineup is Killian Hayes, Jaden Ivey, Bojan Bogdanovic, Marvin Bagley, and James Wiseman. This team honestly isn't terrible. Obviously, they'll end up putting Cade Cunningham back at the 1, but they could really use a small forward in this year's draft, I feel like. Bojan Bogdanovic is an okay player, but he's not great. I feel like he'd be better coming off the bench, since this team could use some depth, I think. There are plenty of good small forwards in this draft this year. We have Brandon Miller and Cam Whitmore, and there's a couple others that are going to go top 10 at least, if not top 5. These Cam Whitmore and Brandon Miller are players that could still be available for the Pistons because, like I said, they're going to get a good pick. So these are players that would make sense to go to the Pistons. Obviously, I'm not going to be oh yeah, the Sacramento Kings, who are going to have obviously a lower pick, need a small forward, and they're gonna get Brandon Miller. You know what I'm saying? I'm making it so that it's gonna be more realistic for you to be able to see how the players could actually get drafted. Number 2, we have the Houston Rockets, and they have Kevin Porter, Jalen Green, Kenyon Martin, Jabari Smith, and Alperen Şengün. Houston looks like they'll be very good in the future, but all these players right now are young and need time to develop. Kenyon Martin is a good player, but he could probably be replaced, meaning that this is another team that could really use a small forward. So maybe Cam Whitmore or Amen Thompson or Brandon Miller if he's still available. The third team is going to be San Antonio, and they have Trey Jones, Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, Jeremy Sochan, and Sandro Mamukelashvili. Sorry. This team does need a lot of help in multiple areas, but I would say that they need a center or a point guard first. Victor Wembanyama should be their first option if they get that first overall pick. But if he isn't available, that they should for sure go for Scoot Henderson, who is a phenomenal player coming out of the G League. The Spurs have quite a bit of picks for the next couple of years, so even if they don't get a good good center and a good point guard in this draft, because they do only have a first round pick, so if they're obviously not going to get a great player out of the second round. Well, I say that, but players like Jokic have came out of the second round, so you can't even really say that. But you're more likely to get a great player in the first round, and next year they should be able to get another point guard or center. Sorry, they should be able to get another point guard or center, depending on what they get this year. Next up, at the number 4 team that we have is Charlotte Hornets. They have Terry Rozier, Kelly Oubre, Gordon Hayward, PJ Washington, and Mark Williams. Obviously, LaMelo Ball, who was out with injury a lot this year, isn't classified as a starter right now, but they are going to have him this season. His only problem is that he gets hurt a lot. But I think they could use somebody to replace Kelly Oubre and Gordon Hayward at that small forward position. Maybe Amen or Ozar Thompson. Or even, like I said, if he's still available, Brandon Miller. But I doubt they're going to have a top 3 pick. or they could go for Cam Whitmore. They could really go for any of those top small forwards, depending on who's still available. Next up, we have the Portland Trailblazers, and their roster, or their starting five, is Anthony Simon, Shaedon Sharpe, Matisse Thybulle, Jeremy Grant, and Yusuf Nurkic. Obviously, they're going to have Damian Lillard, so they're probably going to go with Damian Lillard, Anthony Simons at shooting guard, Shaedon Sharpe at small forward, Jeremy Grant at power forward, and Yusuf Nurkic at center, which that's a great lineup. All five of those players are pretty solid. I would say that they're probably going to want to replace either Yusuf Nurkic or Jeremy Grant, just because Shaedon Sharpe is still a young player, so he's still gonna need time to develop, and that's what's going to happen with all the rookies. Even if they draft a small forward this year, that player is still going to need time to develop. Damian Lillard is obviously still solid for them. Anthony Simons is coming up, and like I said, Shaedon Sharpe, small forward, he still needs time to develop. But that's any rookie. Every rookie needs time to develop. So you're gonna have Jeremy Grant and Yusuf Nurkic, power forwards and small forwards that are gonna be available. Or not power forwards and small forwards, power forwards and centers. There's not very many centers besides Victor Wembanyama that are gonna go that are good in this draft, that are gonna go high. And honestly, Victor Wembanyama might be the only center to go top 20. So with that, they're probably going to want to draft like a power forward, or maybe they'll pick one of those small forwards and be able to run them at the power forward position, because Brandon Miller is 6'9". Honestly, that at that height you could run power forward. You could run center if you had to, but I would say that Brandon Miller could run power forward if he's still available when they have their pick. Cam Whitmore, 6'7", he could run power forward. Amen Thompson and Ozard Thompson are both also 6'7", so any of those small forwards could really run power forward too, I feel like. So any of those players would be a good pick for them. Next up, the Orlando Magic is the sixth team that we're going to talk about here. And Orlando has Markelle Fultz, Gary Harris, Franz Wagner, Paolo Banchero, and Wendell Carter Jr. Markelle Fultz, he obviously had that injury like right before he got into the NBA that messed up his jump shot or whatever. So he's not a great player, but he's not terrible. Gary Harris is alright, I guess, but I feel like they're gonna probably want to go for a shooting guard here, or maybe even like a point guard. Like they could depending on what pick they get, they could go for Scoot Henderson maybe, but they'll probably want to take Keontae George from Baylor. He's a shooting guard. He looks like he's pretty decent, and they could take him, or they could maybe go for like maybe a center if they. Wendell Carter's okay, but I think they'll probably go for a guard. The next team is going to be the Indiana Pacers, and Indiana has Tyrese Halliburton, Andrew Nembhard, Buddy Hield, Aaron Nesmith, and Miles Turner. They're probably going to want to go for a power forward here. Aaron Nesmith is okay, but he's still young. He's not that great. And honestly, if I were them, I would go with Jarris Walker out of Houston. He's a 6'8" power forward, and that would honestly, I would say if they can pick up him, that'd be a good pick for them, because they could use a little help. Next up, we have the Washington Wizards. The Washington Wizards have Monte Morris, Bradley Beal, Kyle Kuzma, Kristaps Porzingis, and Daniel Gafford. I think that they're probably going to want to go for a point guard. So a point guard that could go around their draft pick is Cason Wallace or Anthony Black, two solid point guards. Anthony Black is a taller player, 6'7", and Cason Wallace is also 6'4", which is about the average size for a point guard now in the NBA. Usually they're around like 6'3" to 6'4", maybe 6'5" at the most. And there's obviously a couple of taller players that run the point guard, but most players are around the 6'3" mark. So he's pretty much there. So it depends on what they want to run. If they want to run like a tall ball kind of lineup, or if they want to run that like shorter play, like a normal size point guard. The next team is the Utah Jazz, the ninth team we're going to talk about. And Utah has Colin Sexton, Jordan Clarkson, Lauri Markkanen, Kelly Olynyk, and Walker Kessler. Walker Kessler being young, I don't think they're going to try to go for a center here. And honestly, there's no great centers besides Victor Wembanyama in this draft this year. And I don't think they're going to have the first overall pick. Lauri Markkanen did great this year. First All-Star appearance, he was not that good before he was in Utah. And then after he came to Utah, he started doing really good because, he doesn't have any great like superstar players around him. Jordan Clarkson is a solid player for them. I think he could stay starting. And Colin Sexton is also a solid point guard to run at the one. So I would go for a power forward here if I were them. And there's not really too many power forwards in the top 10. So maybe again they could go with Jarris Walker here, or they could go for one of those small forwards if they're still available, like Amen Thompson or Ozar Thompson. Next we have the Dallas Mavericks, and they have Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving, Tim Hardaway Jr., Reggie Bullock, and Dwight Powell. Obviously we don't know what Kyrie Irving is going to do in this offseason. We don't know if he's going to want to stay with the Dallas Mavericks or possibly go to the Lakers. So honestly, if I were them, I would play it safe and draft maybe like a Nick Smith Jr. as their shooting guard, or they could go for, again here it really depends on what pick they get, but they could go maybe with like Anthony Black, and they could run him at shooting guard. It really all depends on what pick they get, but I would go with a guard here if I were them. At the number 11, here's another Orlando pick that they got from Chicago. And Orlando, again, we can go over Orlando's starting five. They have Markelle Fultz, Gary Harris, Franz Wagner, Paolo Banchero, and Wendell Carter Jr. So if they go with a guard with their first pick, honestly, I think they could go with another guard for their second pick, because they could really use like that guard play, because Markelle Fultz and Gary Harris are both alright. Markelle Fultz is decent, but I think that maybe off the bench he would be a little better. So they could go with, again, this is another team that could go with Nick Smith Jr. here, or they could go with Jalen Hood-Schifino from Indiana, who would also be a pretty good fit for their team, I feel like. Next up, we have Oklahoma City Thunder, and their roster is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Josh Giddey, Lou Dort, Jalen Williams, and Jalen Williams. They have both the Jalen Williams for their power forward and center. So right here, they do have Chet, who's going to be coming back this season. I don't know if he's going to be coming back right at the beginning of the season, but he will be coming back this season. Hopefully he can stay healthy, because I really like Chet Holmgren, so he's gonna run center for them. And honestly, after they get Chet, I feel like they'll be pretty solid, even if they do keep Jalen Williams at the power forward, because both of the Jalen Williams are pretty solid players, I'd say. One is a little better than the other, but I think that right here they could go for a big, and draft a power forward. Another team that maybe they could go with Jarris Walker, or a little farther down, Chris Murray from Iowa. They could go with, honestly. So I feel like they could just draft like a power forward with this pick. Next up, we have the Toronto Raptors, the 13th team that we're going to be talking about here. And Toronto has Fred VanVleet, OG Anunoby, Scotty Barnes, Pascal Siakam, and Jakob Poeltl. And I feel like they really need a center to replace Jakob Poeltl, because I feel like he would be better for them to come off the bench. He's great at grabbing rebounds and stuff, but I feel like he would just be better off the bench, because that's really the only position that they need help with right now, because Fred VanVleet, OG Anunoby, Scotty Barnes, and Pascal Siakam, all four are great players. So Jakob Poeltl really should try to replace him, but the next best center after Victor Wembanyama is going to be like Derek Lively from Duke. They could try to draft a power forward and run him at center, like Taylor Hendricks out of UCF. He's 6'9". They could possibly run him at center, but this is a really, like, I'm really unsure about this pick. Maybe they could go with Chris Murray, who's 6'8", from Iowa, and try to run him at center. But they could also maybe try to trade their pick away and get a solid center from trading. The next team that I want to talk about is the New Orleans Pelicans at the 14th spot on my list of teams. And New Orleans has CJ McCollum, Trey Murphy III, Brandon Ingram, Herbert Jones, and Jonas Valanciunas. They could go for maybe a shooting guard to replace Trey Murphy, who is a solid player, I'd say. He's pretty young. He's still young, but they hopefully will have Zion coming back soon, and maybe he'll be able to stay healthy. So that'll put Herbert Jones to the bench. And then Trey Murphy, I would say they could replace him with a player like maybe Jordan Hawkins from UConn, or Nick Smith Jr., depending on what pick they get from Arkansas. So either one of those players would be a pretty good pick for them. And this team, the Pelicans will have a lot of depth, because they have Jose Alvarado on their bench. If Zion can come back and stay healthy, they'll have Herb Jones on their bench. And then if they do take a shooting guard, they'll end up having Trey Murphy on their bench. And I feel like the Pelicans could be really good if they just play their cards right and their team can stay healthy. The next team is the Atlanta Hawks. The Atlanta Hawks have Trae Young, DeJounte Murray, DeAndre Hunter, John Collins, and Clint Capella. Their team is really solid, and I honestly don't know how they did bad this year. They have a great roster, and honestly, I think whoever they pick, they're going to end up putting on their bench. So they're probably just going to want to pick the best player on the board, who might be like Grady Dick from Kansas, or Nick Smith Jr. if he's still there. But looking a little farther down, there's Taylor Hendricks out of UCF. He's a power forward. So they could really go with anybody here. It's really just who they like. Next up, we have the Utah Jazz, who have Minnesota's pick in this draft. And the Utah Jazz, again, they have Colin Sexton. They have Colin Sexton, Jordan Clarkson, Lauri Markkanen, Kelly Olynyk, and Walker Kessler. With this pick, maybe they could go with a big guy. I mean, I already have them taking a power forward with their first pick, so maybe they could go with, there is Derek Lively, but he's not supposed to go till like the end of the first round. But if they really want a center, they could take him, I guess. Or maybe they could go with a shooting guard and run Jordan Clarkson at the sixth man again. And that if they do go with a shooting guard, they could go with somebody, maybe Jordan Hawkins, or they could snag Bryce Sen. I'm not gonna be able to say this. Sensabog maybe from Ohio State, who is a small forward, but he is 6'6", so I think that he could run shooting guard if they need him to. The next team is the Los Angeles Lakers, and the Lakers have D'Angelo Russell, Austin Reeves, LeBron James, Jared Vanderbilt, and Anthony Davis. They could go with a power forward here to replace Jared Vanderbilt, who is a solid player, but I think that he could come off the bench for them and play pretty decent. They could go with Taylor Hendricks here from UCF. I feel like that's the only power forward here that they could really go with if they end up going with a power forward. Maybe they could go with a shooting guard, but I think that they're going to want to keep Austin Reeves in the starting lineup. But if they do, they could go with Trey Alexander from Creighton. Next, we have the Miami Heat, who are making a really good run in the playoffs right now. So, I mean, they really don't need too much improvement, but Miami Heat could go with, they have Gabe Vincent, Max Strus, Jimmy Butler, Kevin Love, Bam Adebayo. Right now, Tyler Hero just got hurt not too long ago, so I don't know how long in the season he's going to be out for, if he is out into the regular season at all. So they're going to have him running point guard probably. So then that'll leave Max Strus as shooting guard, who is an okay player, but I think either him or Kevin Love could get replaced. So I think that the Heat will go with either a shooting guard or a shooting guard or a power forward here. So this is another team that could maybe go with like Trey Alexander from Creighton, or they could go for a small forward who's big. Maybe like Leonard Miller from the G League that played with Scoot Henderson. He's 6'9" and he's a small forward, so I mean really he could play power forward if you need him to. But Kevin Love is just getting older, so that's the only reason I was thinking maybe they'd go for a power forward. Next up we have Golden State, and they have Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Andrew Wiggins, Draymond Green, and Kevon Looney. The Warriors they struggle with their center position. Kevon Looney is a great center. He's got a ton of rebounds in the playoffs. Obviously, the Warriors were just eliminated from the playoffs by the Lakers, but they made a good run. I think that the Warriors should try to go for maybe somebody to come off their bench who's going to be good. They could go for maybe a small forward like Dariq Whitehead from Duke, who is 6'7", and he, like I said, he plays small forward. Or maybe they could go for Julian Phillips from Tennessee, who is also a small forward, 6'8". Those are two solid picks, I'd say, that they could go with. Or if they do want to go for that center position, they could go with Derek Lively, but he isn't supposed to go till later into the first round. Next up, we have the Houston Rockets with the LA Clippers pick, and the the Rockets have Kevin Porter Jr., Jalen Green, Kenyon Martin Jr., Jabari Smith Jr., and Alperen Şengün, a lot of juniors on this starting five. So honestly, I don't think after they take a small forward, I don't think that they need anybody else to start in their. I don't think they need anybody in their starting five. So they could go for a bench player here, I feel like. And they have Kenyon Martin running their backup small forward if they do take a small forward with that first pick, like I was saying. So maybe they could go for like a a backup, like maybe a backup forward, like a backup power forward, or they could go for a guard, like maybe they could go for Trey Alexander from Creighton, or they could go for Jet Howard from Michigan, who is a solid 6'8", pretty tall. So I think that those two would be Trey Alexander and Jet Howard would be pretty good picks for Houston if they want to take those. If they want to take like a guard in there with their second pick. And next we see the Brooklyn Nets with Phoenix Suns pick. So the Phoenix Suns are not going to have a pick in this draft in the first round. So Brooklyn has Spencer Dinwiddie, Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, and Nick Claxton. They could use a power forward to replace Dorian Finney-Smith, I feel like, because I think, in my opinion, he would be better off the bench. So right here, they could go for like a Rayon Rupert from France, who is 6'6", small forward. You could run him at power forward, but there's not really any like good power forwards that are probably going to be left by the time that they end up getting their pick, because I'm assuming that their pick is going to be like a early 20s pick, like 21, 22. Maybe they'll even get the 20th pick, but they don't really have too many good power forwards left around that time that are supposed to go in the 20s. So I think that they're going to have to end up running a smaller player from the draft at their power forward, or maybe they'll just keep Dorian Finney-Smith in the starting lineup. Again, we have another Brooklyn Nets pick, and after they take a power forward, if they end up taking a power forward, they're gonna need somebody to come off their bench, maybe a center. So this is another team that could take Derek Lively from Duke, or maybe they'll go for a guard like Amari Bailey or Kobe Bufkin. Amari Bailey is from UCLA and Kobe Bufkin is from Michigan. So maybe they could go for a guard or a center, but those are three players that they could possibly take with their second pick. Next up, we have another Portland Trailblazers pick, and the Portland Trailblazers, again, they have Anthony Simon, Shaden Sharp, Matisse Thybulle, Jeremy Grant, and Yusuf Nurkic. I also said that they're going to have Damian Lillard coming back. So I had them taking possibly somebody to replace Yusuf Nurkic. I had them taking like a power forward and then running him at center. But here with this pick, I think that they could possibly take another big man, or maybe they'll go with a power forward with their first pick, and they'll go with Derek Lively, who is like the only other good center in this draft besides Victor Wembanyama. I feel like Derek Lively is the only other center that's going to go first round. So that's why I keep saying every team that needs a center, one of them are going to go with Derek Lively. But he's also not supposed to go till later. So maybe some of these teams will pick a player and then trade them, or they'll trade their draft pick to get the center. Because I've said there's a lot of teams that need a center right now, and there's not too much center play in the NBA. I feel like there's maybe 5 great centers. So a lot of these teams need a center, but there's a low amount of centers in this draft. So Derek Lively might be a good pick to go with for this Portland Trailblazers team, because they're going to want to snag one of those solid centers in the league before they actually get good. Next up, we have the Sacramento Kings. The Sacramento Kings are a great team, and honestly, they did put up a good fight against the Warriors in the playoffs this year. But the Sacramento Kings have De'Aaron Fox, Kevin Huerter, Harrison Barnes, Keegan Murray, and Domantas Sabonis. De'Aaron Fox, obviously a great player. They're not going to put him on the bench. and same with Sabonis. Keegan Murray is young. He's been pretty solid for them so far. And Kevin Huerter is a pretty good player, I'd say. He can shoot the ball. So I think that they'll go with a small forward here to replace Harrison Barnes, because Harrison Barnes is getting pretty up there in age, and he's probably going to start not doing as good soon. He's probably going to start regressing. So they could go with Rayan Rupert here from France, or maybe they could go with a shooting guard to replace like Kevin Huerter. They could go for Kobe Bufkin from Michigan again, or they could go with Julian Strother from Gonzaga. Next up, we have the Memphis Grizzlies, and the Memphis Grizzlies, they have Ja Morant, they have Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Dylan Brooks, who is not going to be returning to the team because they already said that they're not re-signing him into free agency, which I don't blame them one bit. They have Jaren Jackson Jr. at their 4 and Xavier Tillman at their 5, but they should have Steven Adams coming back this year. So they could go for a small forward here because, like I said, Steven Adams is getting... I mean, I wouldn't say he's getting old, but he's not getting any better. So I think they if they wanted to, they could maybe trade away their pick for a center, or they could maybe go for a player to replace Dylan Brooks, who's going to be on a new team, or maybe in China next year. So maybe they'll go with Julian Strother, who is a shooting guard technically from Gonzaga, but I feel like he's 6'7", so if they wanted him to run shooting guard, or if they wanted to run small forward, then he could definitely run small forward for them. The next pick that we have here is Indiana Pacers with Cleveland's pick. So Indiana, like I said earlier, has Tyrese Halliburton, Andrew Nembhard, Buddy Hield, Aaron Nesmith, and Miles Turner, and I did have them replacing Aaron Nesmith with a new power forward. So maybe they'll replace, like, even though he's young, maybe they'll take Andrew Nembhard out of the starting 5 and put in a new player. But honestly, they'll probably go with somebody for their bench here. And honestly, I feel like the Indiana Pacers don't have a crazy amount of depth to their roster, so they could go with a player like Kobe Jones, who's a shooting guard out of Xavier, or they could go with Trace Jackson Davis from Indiana, who's a power forward. I really like him. Next up, we have another Charlotte Hornets pick from Denver this time, and the Charlotte Hornets, like I was saying earlier, they don't have LaMelo Ball in their starting 5 rotation right now because of injuries, but they do have Terry Rozier, Kelly Oubre Jr., Gordon Hayward, PJ Washington, and Mark Williams. So I said that possibly they could go with a center to replace Mark Williams, I think. But they're definitely going to want to take a small forward if they haven't already with this pick. They could go for, if they've already taken a small forward with their first pick, they could go for a center, like if he's still there, which I highly doubt he's going to be, but they could go with Derek Lively Jr., or not Derek Lively Jr., Derek Lively the second from Duke, or they could go with a player who is a power forward, but they're taller, so they could run them at center if they need them to. So like Trace Jackson Davis from Indiana, like I just said, or Gregory Jackson from South Carolina are both players that you could run at that center position if you need to, because they're both 6'9". So either one of those picks would be good for Charlotte. Next, we have another Utah Jazz pick, and this is Philly's pick. But the Utah Jazz, again, they have Colin Sexton, Jordan Clarkson, Larry Markkinen, Kelly Olynyk, and Walker Kessler. This is going to be their 3rd pick in the draft. They could go for anything just to have on their bench. They could go for maybe Gregory Jackson. They could go for Jalen Wilson out of Kansas. They could go for like a guard, maybe like Kobe Jones from Xavier. They really have they have the power to pick like whoever they like at this pick, really, because I feel like they could be comfortable with the starting five that they'll end up having if they can get somebody to replace Kelly Olynyk in this draft. The next pick is going to be another Indiana Pacers pick from Boston. And again, Indiana's roster is looking like Tyrese Halliburton, Andrew Nembhard, Buddy Hield, Aaron Nesmith, Miles Turner. And I said that maybe they'll take a power forward to replace Aaron Nesmith and a shooting guard to replace Andrew Nembhard. So at this point, there's a very low chance that they're going to take somebody to replace one of their starters. So honestly, any of the players that they draft are probably going to be off the bench. So again, this is another team that they can really go with whoever they like, really. Maybe they could go with Dillon Mitchell from Texas, who's a 6'8" small forward. Or they could go with maybe, I don't know, maybe somebody like Kevin McCullough Jr. from Kansas, who is a 6'6" shooting guard. But it really just, again, depends on whatever they really want, because they're just going to be adding depth at this point. The final pick that we're going to talk about here is the LA Clippers pick from Milwaukee. And the LA Clippers have Russell Westbrook, Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, Nick Batum, and Ivica Zubac. I think they should either replace Nicholas Batum or Ivica Zubac. Ivica Zubac is a solid player, so I would say they probably should replace Nicholas Batum. And for the Clippers, I really like Trace Jackson Davis. I think that he would be a really good fit to go with this Clippers team, and he fits exactly what they need. They need a power forward to replace Nick Batum. They need a power forward to replace Nicholas Batum, and Trace Jackson Davis is a power forward, and I think that he could definitely replace Nick Batum. That's going to be it for today's video. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button and subscribe, and let me know down in the comments who you think that your favorite team is going to pick, and I'll see you guys next Sunday here on the Hoops and Stuff podcast.